As the Big Ten and the SEC become even more powerful, 4- and 5-star players aren't choosing the Big 12 as much. Does that kill the conference? This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Big 12. I'm Drake Toll, the host of America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thank you for making this show your first listen every single day. Today, we're joined by Brian Smith, the Locked On Podcast Network recruiting guru. Thanks to LinkedIn Talent Solutions for bringing Brian on. We'll go through expansion, ruining the Big 12 and Big 12 recruiting specifically, as well as the Big 12 staying relevant amongst recruits if certain schools cannot afford to pay this revenue sharing $22 million a year. And we'll tap it off with West Virginia being really good in this conference and recruiting and how maybe that can't stay stable. We open it up, though, with expansion. Brian, the Big Ten, the SEC, first and foremost, is there, and as I do shows back and forth this offseason of how the Big 12 stays alive and what is the future of the Big 12 and is it positive or negative, one thing that is ever prevalent is 4- and 5-star kids that say SEC. The goal is to play in the SEC, and I think the Big Ten is getting to that level. How do you see it, especially in comparison to where the Big 12 sits?
Those two are so far apart from the Big 12, it's not even a discussion point.
Wow.
It's not. The Big 12 is a complete afterthought. I have not heard one kid talk about playing in the Big 12 this year. Not one. And I go to 7-on-7 and camps, Under Armour camps, you name it, not one. So that pretty well narrows it down.
Is that a new trend with Texas and Oklahoma gone from the conference?
100%. Those two carried the water, and all the other fans, other schools can get mad for me saying that. It's fact. And it's because cachet is everything. Your brand name is everything. People can throw things at their computer screens all they want. It's still true. I wish it wasn't, because like when I was growing up, it was fun for me to watch some of those games. Like Texas, everybody circled on the calendar.
Yep.
And I get it. Who are you circling now if you're in the Big 12? Like if you're a recruit going in and you're going to Texas Tech, you're going to circle the Sooners and the Horns. Who are you circling now? I mean, seriously. So I'm not picking on, like, Utah's really good. That's one of the best coach teams in college football. There's a handful of teams like that. You need to circle them, but they don't have the same cachet. It hurts the brand of the league. It makes it harder for them to get anybody into the playoff. And ultimately, this thing they call money tends to go away when you don't have those big name schools, because advertisers want programs with massive fan bases that are rabid. Texas and Oklahoma have nutty fan bases. Yeah. Not that some others don't, but those two just dwarf everybody else in the Big 12. So I think there's a problem, and I don't think it's fixable. At some point, either the Big 12 gets dissolved or they got to add somebody back from the SEC. Something like that has to happen, because the numbers financially are going to get really, really difficult to overcome.
I hear a lot SEC chant. The kid wants to play in the SEC. When I was in high school, I had buddies of mine that were good at football that their goal was to play at an SEC school. I never really heard, oh, I want to be a Big Ten football player. Is that chanted? Do you hear that at camps, or is it really just the prominence of those three letters?
You hear it. It's a little more regional. I'm from the Midwest, and it means more there.
Yeah.
But the problem is the vast majority of the best recruits are from where? The Deep South, because it's a cultural thing. I grew up in Indiana, where if you were an elite basketball player, in your own mind, you just played basketball even if you're 5'11". Might have been better to play wide receiver or corner and play football, but they didn't. That's changed a little bit, but in the South, it's automatic. You're going to play running back, slot, or corner if you're 5'11". Everybody plays the same sport. They might run track a little bit, but that's the way it is. That's why you see the SEC dominate. Do you know who number one in the country was, states, for the average player, like the per capita to go to the NFL? Was Georgia. What school is its most dominant in college football right now? And that would be the Georgia Bulldogs. So these things aren't that difficult to figure out. Location is everything, tradition, and fan base. And if you don't have those kind of programs in your league, TV contracts do not follow you where you go.
I know you've been closely tied to Florida State and that team, their program's current exit from the ACC. As Florida State and Clemson plan to leave that conference, does it take away that recruiting cachet that they once had in the ACC?
Oh, yeah, they're in trouble.
Yeah.
The league is, I don't know how it'll work out. I'm not a lawyer, and I have no interest in those cases. Yeah. Even on my Locked On Seminoles podcast, I do everything I can to avoid that stuff.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if it's North Carolina, if it's Clemson, Florida State, if any of them are able to leave, let's say in the next 2 years, like officially done, the league then has a precedent against it. And that's why they're throwing every injunction, everything they can just to delay. ACC is not going to win long term. They're not. Worst case scenario for the Florida States and whatnot, it'll go about the 6-7 years, but they're leaving. They're done. They're tired of fighting it. And that alone has hurt the league. I had a kid last year tell me that he would have signed with Miami, and this was unsolicited, but he said the problem was they weren't in the Southeastern Conference. And I was like, wow. And he ended up going to Auburn. Auburn was not very good. It wasn't like their cachet was really high, but they're in the Southeastern Conference. Things like that happen now. Kids are determined to play for one of those schools that, are in that league. And you know what? With the revenue sharing they have and how much emphasis they put on the facilities and everything else, I can't really blame a young man for doing that.
Let's go revenue sharing next, because it's not a good thing for a good majority of Big 12 schools. This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. I went to a Tyler Childers concert 2 weeks ago for Bottom Dollar and sat in the pit. Best concert of my life. There were pretty ladies there. I did that by going to Game Time and getting them last minute. I bought flights to Virginia, but I still had not bought my tickets. That's because Game Time gives you last minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Flash deals, zone deals, all in pricing. Toggle that feature and it shows you the total up front. No surprise fees at checkout. The lowest price guaranteed, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. With Game Time ticket coverage, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets or concert tickets or theater tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, and that is guaranteed. Lockdown recruiting expert Brian Smith joining us. If you at home have paid any attention whatsoever to revenue sharing in college sports recently, there are athletic departments across the country that are now having to dole out $22 million to their athletes. That's coming directly from the athletic budget. And the problem is, you go to Ames, Iowa, where athletic director Jamie Pollard has started to take back some of their current projects, working on building up their arena or building up football facilities. They're canceling those to try to afford to have student athletes. Brian, are recruits in tune with that $22 million number and what revenue sharing means, or are they just as confused as most other people?
That is probably too new for them.
Yeah.
And most kids look at it differently. They have no interest in the legal jargon. Mm-hmm. It'll probably kind of come around over the next 6-8 months as they take visits because of negative recruiting. I'll just say it.
Wow.
The schools that can afford it are going to tell you this other school over here can't. That's unfortunately how they're going to find out more often than not. Iowa State wasn't getting the kid that Texas wanted anyway, but now they may lose the kid that Texas Tech wanted, or whoever has the most money is going to have a bigger way to go. Because, I mean, no offense, if it's even close, why would you go to the school that's going to struggle to pay? Because then your facilities aren't as good, trainers or whatever. I mean, it's money. So everything in society can probably be answered by that one word in some capacity. Yeah. And it goes into recruiting too. Do you blame a kid for not wanting to play at the best facilities and the best training staffs and all that? I don't. So that's unfortunate, but certain schools just don't have the same capacity to bring in the cash. I mean, can you imagine the difference in advertising dollars in Iowa compared to Dallas? You know what I mean? It's just not the same. It is what it is. I don't know if leagues will come up with a way, because it hurts at some point, even the top Big 12, ACC, SEC, you have to have some teams at the bottom that survive. You got to play somebody. Yeah. So if the gap gets too wide, they may have to do some more revenue sharing stuff, and that'll be more arguing. But some of the schools making just $1 gazillion, Ohio State, LSU, whatever, they may have to find a way to help the school that they're kicking their tail, but they got to stay afloat.
Yeah. Texas A&M Athletic Director Trev Alberts said it's not necessarily a budget problem or even a cash problem as much as it is that budget problem, that they're overpaying a lot of staff at these schools. And if you rework your budget, you should be okay. And hopefully that's the case for a lot of Big 12 schools. But Brian, I even want to pause that conversation and go to just Brian Smith, the guy who likes football, the guy who is a football fan. We have talked on this show, you and I, about expansion and how it's changing college football. What about this? Now students are going to get a W-2 or 1099 at the end of the year from their university because they were paid to play as a football player on their team by the university. What do you think of that?
The first thing I think of is bankruptcy. There's going to be some really bad stories we're going to report on because too many of the kids that I know have idiots around them that tell them what to do with their money or not do, and they'll end up spending it unwisely. That's the first thing. I'm a glass half empty guy with this kind of stuff. I worry, but unfortunately, young people don't know how to handle money. The second thing is they need to be able to educate these kids. If you're making X number of dollars, like if you're making six figures and you're a dude like the running back at LSU or whatever it is, you got to have financial advisors for these people. Yeah. Because otherwise, it's going to make the school look bad when kids are broke. So we need to, it's college. We need to educate people. And then finally, it's cool that kids are getting money for their name, image, and likeness in any way, shape, or form. It's long overdue. So that's cool, but they better be careful how they do it the next few steps. And I don't know the best way to do it. I know I'm complaining, but I see pitfalls ahead.
Have the universities overstepped? Have we stepped into a new era where we cannot see college as, obviously we can't see them as amateurs. Have we stepped into a new era where we have ruined the traditional college football? And is that a good or a bad thing?
It's definitely no longer traditional football. That's over.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as amateurism if everybody's getting paid. I don't see any other way. It's either you are or you aren't getting paid, and they're being forced to now through the court order. So that's good. If you do it right. I'm hoping that a lot of boosters and different people set up investment opportunities for long term, and I assume they will. It's in the best interest of all parties involved, but they got to find a way to do it before Title IX gets involved. That's the other elephant in the room, because it's a matter of time for somebody sues and said the women should get more, etc. This is a never-ending lawsuit. Is my concern. I think it's good overall, the concept. It's just how do you place it into a perspective where it works for everybody? That's really, really hard.
That was a great quote from Linda Livingstone, the Baylor president, where she said to an athletic council, I don't know where this plays into Title IX. I don't know who gets what. Nobody has clarified what revenue sharing means, as in, do we give football half and everybody else the other half, or does it divvy out equally among sports? We don't know.
Exactly right.
That's going to be a huge piece in this. And Brian, before we move on to Big 12 recruiting like West Virginia, I worry about not just the back half of the Big 12, but even your Mississippi State. I think their athletic department looks at $22 million and goes, that's not great. Does this hurt some of those bottom level revenue teams in the SEC and Big 10?
It can. Vanderbilt, obviously, it's got more money than it knows what to do with, but it's never taken athletics seriously. True. They are finally putting in a real football facility at their stadium, like they're under major construction and all that. Yeah. But Mississippi State doesn't have the same money Alabama does. It doesn't have the same money that Texas, that's a whole other animal. Yeah. So I don't know how they can keep up. And they were getting the bejesus beat out of them most years by Bama, Texas, those kind of schools anyway. So I don't know what they do, because boosters are only going to divvy up so much. How do you get more revenue to a cow school like Mississippi State? It's out in the sticks. How do you get more revenue there? I don't know the answer to that. I'm sure they're having meetings about it. Yeah. But at some point, it's going to hurt your recruiting. It's going to make it harder to get coaches there, because they know the same question you just asked, and they're going to be concerned about it too. Why would I work twice as hard and get less results when I can go over here and coach somewhere, win more, work less? I mean, do you blame them? It's just, there's 4 or 5 schools in the SEC. It's still way different than everybody else. Florida, LSU, Bama, Georgia, Texas, those schools, they're just different. So that's going to be a problem they have to figure out. And if your athletic directors aren't good, and then the league commissioner is not really good, and they can't find a way to get along, those schools at the bottom that you just mentioned, Drake, are in a lot of trouble.
Yep. The revenue sharing deal helps about 20 schools in America. It sets 20 apart from everybody else, and that might be a little bit too large of a number. And that's like you said, somebody's got to be around for them to play, for those schools to play, and we're dwindling that as we go. Coming up, West Virginia has been so impressive to be. How do you win games at West Virginia? This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Talent Solutions. Look, I have an intern named Zach, and Zach tweets out some things that I agree with and don't agree with, but they're all good things. And that's what makes me happy is the active Twitter account of Locked On Big 12, because my intern Zach, who found this on LinkedIn Talent Solutions. It's not just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those you aren't actually searching for a new job. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. If you're looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the right place. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours on LinkedIn. Hire professionals like a professional. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and they might not have the time or resources to hire. So they're constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring, so post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. If you want to find an intern just like Zach, who will keep the ship running healthy, it's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Locked On recruiting expert Brian Smith with us. The West Virginia Mountaineers impressed me a whole lot last year by winning 9 games, Brian. And they're one of the schools that I wanted to pick on because we haven't in a while when it comes to recruiting. To begin this conversation, there is not a single 4-star player in the state of West Virginia in the class of 2024. There is not a single nationally ranked player, according to 24/7, in that class. And a few of those kids, just 3 from the state, are going to West Virginia. Brian, if you had 4 classes of 3 guys, that makes up 12 players. You could barely foot one side of the ball. How do the West Virginia Mountaineers stay relevant in college football from a recruiting standpoint when things are so bleak in that state, high school wise?
It's a miracle. It's a miracle. I mean, seriously, like The following is a factual statement. I go to games in South Florida where there are more Power 5 prospects on the field on a given Friday night between the two teams than there are in the state of West Virginia as a whole.
Yep.
And it's not close. Like there literally be 20 players or more that are between the two schools. If you go from freshman to senior, it's over 30. American Heritage, St. Thomas Aquinas, etc. It's insane. And that's why West Virginia recruits South Florida so hard. They take a lot of the 3-star kids down there. The recipe has always been the same. It goes back to Neyland, etc. They redshirt. They take kids and they build them up. They have to win the long game. I think of BYU. They do the missions. Big 12 school that they got 23 and 24-year-olds at offensive tackle. That matters, man. He may not be as athletic as you, but if he gets his hands on you, it's not going to end well. They have to win with 21, 22, and 23-year-olds. Otherwise, they're going to get smoked. Now, it still probably won't go well for West Virginia when they play Ohio State because they got some 19-year-old receiver they still can't cover. But at least in the box, they can beat people up. And you got to give the coaches credit. They have been able to make big plays in the passing game with different guys over the last 10, 15 years. Whoever has been there, that's been a big part of it. It's still a miracle, though, because their margin for error is so thin. You can give a lot of credit to the strength and conditioning program because they don't have the same depth. The guys get hurt there. Like the difference between player 1 and 2 at a spot can be significant. It's not like you're trotting in a guy that Alabama, their next 5-star defensive end. They don't have that kid at West Virginia. It's amazing because that is literally one of the worst jobs in all of the Power 4 now is West Virginia for recruiting. There's just not enough players in state. Everything they do, it's got to be out of state, and that's hard. That's really hard.
Brian, before, and I know there's some West Virginia fans that are listening that probably feel twofold. They feel, oh, wow, it's a miracle that we're good. It's crazy how good our staff has been. But also, are they dogging our state's high school recruiting? No, dogging's the wrong word. Just being objective about it. I mean, I come from Arkansas, and in the state of Arkansas, we had 5 guys go Power 5 out of the class of 2019. There just weren't. And I think 4 of the 5 didn't finish at a Power 5 school. It's not a very good state for recruiting, and there are many of those that exist. So then the question becomes, and maybe this applies to in Arkansas because they're SEC, like what's the draw if you're in a state where recruiting is not ripe? How do you get kids there? I know Arkansas's got like the Dallas tie. For West Virginia, NIL doesn't seem to be crazy good, right? And is it the transfer portal? Do schools like this, are they going to have to start heavily concerning themselves with the portal as redshirting players becomes so non-existent?
I don't know another path because kids are not very patient. Yep. Especially linemen, though. They're a little more like offensive linemen. They can do that a little bit, like quarterback and stuff. If West Virginia misses, of course, quarterback's more important than any other spot. If they miss on an evaluation or they don't coach a kid up at that spot, they may not be 6-6. They might be 2-10. They have to win at quarterback and offensive line. Yep. And then the portal has to fill in spots where there aren't corners walking out of the state of West Virginia. All right. They're getting kids from Florida, Georgia, Washington, D.C., stuff like that. They have to. And of course, they've always recruited Pennsylvania harder than any other state because it's right next to it. And they should. But again, you're still talking about winning 80 to 90% of your recruiting battles out of state. The only schools in the country that are any good at that right now that pretty much do the same are Notre Dame, which kind of speaks for itself, Oregon, who has insane NIL money and the greatest booster of all time in Phil Knight. He's a billionaire, not an M, a B at the beginning of that word. Yeah. And those schools just have different kind of cachet. Every other school that is a tradition-rich program has a better recruiting base than most of the schools around them, like the Texas school. Like even Oklahoma, it's only 3 hours to Dallas. Yeah. And Oklahoma's not a terrible state for in-state. It's just not the same. Location is the biggest factor for who wins because recruiting is your biggest thing, and it's easier just to get the local kid. So I don't know how they do it at West Virginia, but they've always had periods where they went up. It's really a fascinating study.
And this is something I've wondered for so long. I'm so glad that I have you here to ask. Is the era of kids who grew up, I mean, I'm looking at Georgia right now, the class that they just brought in. I can guarantee you 90% of those kids, when they were 5 years old, were wearing a different shirt. They were wearing a UT shirt or an Oklahoma or a Kansas State or, any given. Have we left the era of kid grows up as a fan of the school and then attends that school? Or were we ever really in that era when it comes to recruiting?
When I was a little kid, we were, but that's when just about all the guys stayed local. Now, because of NIL, I talk to kids and it's always off the record stuff. Yeah. They're offering too much money over here for me to bypass. Yep. And you know what? If you're going to get $100K more at school X instead of school Y, who's going to, that changes your life. So it changes your family's life, especially some inner city kid that's had it rough. He's not going to pass that up. Yeah. He may bypass the school he always wanted to go to and go play at the rival because it's still college football, but now his family's taken care of immediately. So that T-shirt probably isn't going to matter as much as what they're being offered in NIL. And to your point, a lot of parents, when they go on these visits, the first thing they say is, let's talk NIL before we go into anything else. That's not what schools want to hear. And that causes some strife. Some schools are done. There's a lot of in and outs where we think at school is a leader and then they're not, or vice versa. It's really the Wild West. It's impossible to project where kids are going anymore. It's really wild.
I think you hit the nail on the head earlier in the show by saying money. I mean, that's it. TV networks, expansion, realignment, the house case to kids and their parents' money. That's what's pushing college football. Hey, I like making money. I know you like making money, and we make more money when folks click on our stuff. Where can more people find your recruiting news every day?
At FBScout_Florida on X. Right now, it is wild. Every time I click on something, it's a surprise. Kids from all over the country going everywhere because of alignment and stuff. Kids from Oklahoma going to Auburn. Kids from LA going to Penn State. It's just stuff that's never happened in my life. It is wild, but I like to cover it. So you can find me on X.
And if there's one guy who's going to put it all in a concise place, it's Brian Smith. Thanks to LinkedIn Talent Solutions for bringing him on today. This has been, it always will be. Hey, you come back on Friday. We got even more for you in expansion, realignment, and recruiting, the transfer portal specifically, all this offseason on Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.